Hello and welcome to the program. Here's what's coming up. Ahead of the Ukrainian Independence Day on Wednesday, President Volodymyr Zelensky vows to restore Ukrainian rule over Russia-annexed Crimea. China calls on the United States to stop official interactions in all forms with the Taiwan region. Plus, U.S. President Donald Trump sues the Department of Justice over the search on his Florida home. Well, welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Amarachi Ubani, and let's bring you up to speed now with developments out of Ukraine in the last couple of hours. We begin with President Volodymyr Zelensky vowing to restore Ukrainian rule over Russia-annexed Crimea, a move he says would help re-establish world law and order. He was addressing an international conference attended by about 40 presidents and prime ministers, all but one of them attending online. The Polish President Andrzej Duda himself in Kyiv, sitting beside the Ukrainian president there for the Crimea platform, as seeks to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity and end Russia's annexation of Crimea. In his opening address, President Zelensky said, "Where it all began, it will end there." Speaking about Crimea, he told counterparts that Russia has turned Crimea into an ecological disaster zone and a military springboard for aggression, using it to fire 750 cruise missiles at cities and communities. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also attended the conference remotely, though, told fellow leaders that Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea is a direct precursor of today's war.
Putin forcibly annexed the territory of a European country and forcibly redrew a European frontier for the first time since 1945. He ignored the fact that Russia itself had repeatedly recognized Crimea as being part of Ukraine. And he broke so many international agreements that I can't list them all. Ever since the annexation, the people of Crimea have endured a brutal and systematic campaign of human rights abuses by the Russian authorities.
Meanwhile, Ukraine has imposed a 2-day curfew over the northeastern city of Kharkiv as fears grow that Russia might attack during the country's Independence Day anniversary. A curfew begins 7 p.m. local time today and ends at 7 in the morning of Thursday. Kharkiv has come under frequent and deadly longer-range artillery and rocket fire since Russia launched what it calls a special military operation to demilitarize its smaller neighbor and protect Russian-speaking communities on February 24. A Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today met with his Syrian counterpart in Moscow to discuss topical issues of international and regional agenda. Syria and North Korea are the only UN member states that have recognized the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Eastern Ukraine, along with Russia. The Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal Mekdad said Russia's special military operation in Ukraine was a just, necessary war, and he hoped that Russian forces would complete the task assigned by President Vladimir Putin in the coming days and weeks. Security has been beefed up, however, in the Ukrainian capital ahead of tomorrow's Independence Day as it braces for a surge in Russian attacks. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Moscow could try something particularly ugly in the run-up to the anniversary. It's now 6 months since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Scores of people have died and there has been widespread destruction of cities, while the conflict itself is said to be locked in a stalemate. Today, however, is Flag Day in Ukraine. It comes a day just before the Independence Day celebrations, which is tomorrow. It will be 31 years since Ukraine became independent of the former Soviet Republic. And much earlier, President Zelensky vowed to raise the Ukrainian flag in currently Russian-occupied parts of the country. He held a flag-raising ceremony as well as saying, in those occupied temporarily, it will wave forever. In Melitopol, over the Square of Victory, where a flag off those who will lose this war cannot be, Blue and yellow flag will be raised in Kherson over the Square of Freedom. His words were followed by a moment of silence in honor of those who have lost their lives to the current conflict with Russia. Kyiv has banned public celebrations of Independence Day, citing a threat of more attacks. Security concerns have also been heightened for U.S. citizens who have been told by the government to leave Ukraine, believing that Russia is preparing to target civilian and government infrastructure over the next few days as the war reaches the 6-month mark. A warning follows that of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. A statement from the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv says the Department of State's information that Russia is stepping up efforts to launch attacks against Ukraine's civilian infrastructure and government facilities in the coming days. It said that U.S. citizens should leave Ukraine now by their own means if it is safe to do so. It won't be the first time that the U.S. will be issuing such a warning. But Russia is blaming Ukrainian forces for the shelling in an area just near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant on Monday with Western long-range weapons. Zaporizhzhia is one of the largest nuclear power complexes in Europe. It generates a quarter of Ukraine's total electricity, and it's been under control of Russian forces since March. It's also been the scene of military strikes in recent days. A Russian side said that the Ukrainian armed forces on Monday used long-range weapons provided by the United States to shell the city of Energodar. A thermal power plant near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was shelled, killing one civilian and injuring another. Ukraine has not responded to the allegation. Russia's defense ministry also says its forces have downed a Ukrainian Su-27 fighter jet over the Kharkiv region of eastern Ukraine. In its briefing today, Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov said Moscow has destroyed 2 US-made M777 howitzer artillery guns. The report cannot be independently verified. This is pretty interesting. Some Russian experts believe in the bombardment of Ukrainian cities by Russian forces has consolidated the will and resolve of the Ukrainian people to continue fighting and has brought new life to NATO, they say. They also say neither side is showing any signs of laying down arms and brokering a peace deal, and that the war has also unified NATO and unified support for Ukraine.
You know, there was a comparison of David and Goliath, right? How Ukrainian armed forces were able to repel, especially around Kyiv, in small units, mobile units, understanding the terrain. So that gave confidence to Western allies to supply more armaments. And we do see evolution of that strategy. But still, I would argue that there is a kind of a discrepancy where Kyiv would like to have more faster, and the West is doing a very calibrated supply in order to either still leave an off-ramp to Russia or to bog Russians down without making much progress, but not really defeating Russian forces on the ground in a total defeat.
This has revivified NATO. I mean, after the debacle in Afghanistan, NATO now has a new purpose, which is really its old purpose, containing Russia. And it really means the US has to, continue to re-engage in Europe. And of course, what the Europeans worry about is what happens in 2024 in the United States presidential election, that could change that again. But as long as you have a US government that is committed to the alliance, we are back to a situation where the US and its allies in Europe and Asia will be, allied against the combination of Russia and China.
I want to bring in a security analyst, David Otto. He's in London. David, thank you for joining me this evening. While Ukraine expects a barrage of Russian missile strikes tomorrow, and so does the US and every other European country who has been following what's been going on since February 24th, they're expecting a barrage of missile strikes tomorrow in Ukraine because it's their Independence Day and the strikes will be coming from Russia. Do you think Russia is really planning a massive attack against Ukraine on its Independence Day, especially on the capital, Kyiv?
Amarachi, I think, of course, that has been the narrative that the United States has put out through the State Department, warning Ukraine that there is a possibility that Russia would launch a number of missiles, beyond, of course, the Donbas eastern region where it has its strongholds, perhaps. But no one really knows. No one is in the mind of Vladimir Putin to know what exactly he's going to do. Again, this coincides, as you rightly said, with the independence of Ukraine from the old Soviet Union. And this is again, comes, at a time when we are now the 6th month into a now conflict, of course, which Russia called a special military operation. So nobody really knows what Russia intends to do. But these are all speculations, which, of course, the West is putting out. We don't know because Putin hasn't said anything. He doesn't normally speak. So we just have to wait and see. But it's a good call for Ukraine, to prepare its defensive posture, in the expectation that if Russia does launch, they can defend themselves.
And that's a really terrible place to be in, isn't it? The part of the unknown, not knowing what would happen on Independence Day. I mean, today is Flag Day. The much that's happened so far is the attack on Zaporizhia, the small facility within Zaporizhia, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So at the conference this morning, President Zelensky said the war started with the Russian annexation of Crimea. A number of world leaders have also attributed the war to that's where it began. And they also call for Russia to give up Crimea as well. But do you think it's realistic of the Ukrainian president to talk about regaining, the peninsula, to regain the Crimea region from from Russia, when it's still trying to kick Russia out of territory it already controls, which is the other parts of Ukraine?
I think it's a Herculean task, for kind of an ambition for the Ukrainian president to set for Ukraine, considering the fact, as you rightly mentioned, that they still haven't been able to, dominate Russia positions in the east and the south, in the Donbas region, where Russia literally controls that region. So let alone talk about the possibility of regaining the Crimean territory, which was taken from Ukraine in 2014. This is a very difficult task. But of course, Vladimir Zelensky has to portray, the image that Ukraine, has the capacity to retake all territories that have been taken from it by Russia. That's the only way that, it guarantees that it has the support of its citizens. And it's another way of guaranteeing that the Europeans and the NATO allies and the United States who are backing Ukraine, continue to do so. But from a military perspective, Russia is such a big nation compared to Ukraine, and I don't see the possibility of Ukraine militarily retaking either the Donbas region or Crimea, and I don't think Russia is going to give that up as we speak. So it's good for Ukraine in terms of morale, but from a military perspective, I don't see that happening.
Now, we played a clip just before we came to you. There was a clip of some analysts in Russia who actually think that, the war continues as no side is willing to lay down arms. But this was another clip we didn't play, and that was of the French President Emmanuel Macron at the Crimea conference this morning, saying that the EU support for Ukraine will not wane. He's saying that the struggles against Russia's invasion will continue for the long term. We already know, we've already established, this war continues in its 6th month now. How much longer do you think that Europe can continue to keep up with the support for Ukraine during this war?
I think within and beyond Europe, Amarachi, we've seen the impact of this war, not just from the fact that Europe is spending a huge amount of money and weaponry to support Ukraine, but from the high prices of fuel and gas. And, some people have described what Europe is about to witness as a winter of discontent, because, there is a possibility that, this war would have a terrible impact on Europe. But again, as I mentioned earlier on, this goes beyond Europe. I think the only country that we've seen actively before South Africa is Turkey, that has tried and continuously tries to mediate. We've also seen, of course, the UN mediating, on the release of some of the grains that were stored in Ukraine. We've seen that being successful. But throughout this war, in the 6 months that we are in, what we've seen is a continuous support for one side or the other, and that gives us, hopelessness in terms of, how long, it will take for this war to end. Neither Vladimir Putin, from Russia, nor Vladimir Zelensky from Ukraine is showing any signs of giving away some leverage. So, dark days to come as we approach the winter.
Yeah, and Russia already accuses Ukraine of being behind the killing of the daughter of the Russian ultra-nationalist Alexander Dugin. Ukraine has denied the accusation and says that this is not the way it works. That's literally what, the commander said. Who do you believe in this instance? And do you think that this may have any impact on the war, or is it an act of sabotage?
Amarachi, I think what is very clear is that Darya Dugina, who is the daughter of a well-known Russian ultra-nationalist, as they call him, her death has brought a lot of questions to be asked. I mean, what some analysts are saying that perhaps this was an internal Russian intelligence job to use it as an excuse to launch attacks, on Ukraine on a day or at a time when Ukraine wants to celebrate its 31st independence, from Russia. I mean, or the former Soviet Union. I think, again, what the Russians are saying is that, this is a Ukrainian, job. I mean, they're saying that Ukraine has brought in mercenaries or spies or sleeper cells, that are conducting terrorist attacks within, Russia itself. It could also be that Ukraine wants to provoke Russia to then launch an attack, to win the morality of, the Western nations to continue to support Ukraine. But, it's neither here nor there. Investigations are still going on. But I don't see any, form of, transparency because, of course, the attack happened in Russia and Russia is blaming Ukraine.
Indeed, I guess we'll have to leave it there. The analyst I spoke to earlier today said it's a bit too early to make the call on who and what side may be telling the truth at this time. David Otto, thank you again for your analysis.
Thank you.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says there will be no mercy for the organizers, the instigators and the perpetrators of the murder of Darya Dugina, a daughter of the Russian ultra-nationalist Alexander Dugin, who was killed in a car bomb on Saturday. Addressing a news conference today, he said an investigation is ongoing to determine the perpetrators. His comment, of course, comes as a memorial service held today for Darya. Some of her friends said they were hopeful her death could help convey the message to the government that it is time to stop playing around with special military operations. One of them even said it's time to start a war, a serious war. Another respondent, TV presenter Dmitry Kiselyov, says the only possible response Russia could take is the compromising denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine. Dugina's father, a vocal supporter of both Putin and Russia's military operation in Ukraine, said only Russian victory in Ukraine could justify his daughter's death. President of the service as well, where parliamentary leaders of the three main pre-Kremlin parties all hailed Darya as a patriot and promised that those who had ordered and carried out her murder would get their just desserts. Coming up after the break. Malaysians welcome court order for former Prime Minister Najib Razak to begin a 12-year prison sentence over corruption charges. That's in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching The World Today on Channels Television. Let's turn our attention now to Malaysia. where people have been praising a court order that former Prime Minister Najib Razak begin a 12-year prison sentence today after upholding a guilty conviction on charges related to a multi-billion-dollar graft scandal at State Fund 1 Malaysia Development Berhad, better known as 1MBD or MDB. A federal court ruling has held the downfall of Najib, who until 4 years ago governed Malaysia with an iron grip and suppressed local investigations of the 1MDB scandal that has implicated financial institutions and high-ranking officials worldwide. Well, his lawyer, Hisiam Paul Take, is disappointed with the verdict. Speaking after in court today, he said only God alone can dispense perfect justice.
You have heard the decision of the Federal Court. Verdict was read by the learned Chief Justice. Of course, we are very sad because we lost the appeal. I only say that we seek comfort and solace in the words of a great Indian jurist who said that the Almighty alone can dispense perfect justice.
The former Prime Minister left court in a black vehicle with a police escort shortly after he was ordered to begin his 12-year sentence. He was seen leaving Malaysia's top court by witnesses who say his destination was not clear. Najib Razak was also handed a 20 million ringgit fine after the court unanimously dismissed his appeals and that a lower court's conviction was safe. A former Prime Minister said he was not given a fair trial in his final appeal, just hours before the court pronounced its verdict. Speaking to supporters and journalists outside the federal court, Najib thanked them and said everything he proposed to the court was rejected. The 69-year-old Najib was found guilty in July of criminal breach of trust, abuse of power, and money laundering for illegally receiving about $10 million from SRC International, a former unit of State Fund 1 Malaysia Development Berhad. Najib pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 12 years jail time and 210 million ringgit fine. To the Asia-Pacific now. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen says the island nation saw off China's military decades ago when its forces bombarded offshore Taiwanese islands, and that resolve to defend the homeland continues to this day. Addressing a visiting delegation of Japanese lawmakers today, she said the battle to protect our homeland showed the world that no threat of any kind could shake the Taiwanese people's resolve to defend their nation, not in the past, not now, and not in the future. Tsai was referring, of course, to China's attacks on Taiwan-controlled islands of Kinmen and Matsu, just off the Chinese coast, which started in August 1958 and lasted more than a month. The conflict ended in a stalemate. Following that meeting, Tsai met 2 Japanese lawmakers and other foreign parliamentarians also expected to visit this year, including from Canada and Britain, defying Chinese pressure not to go. Well, China, however, has its eyes on the U.S. government officials coming into Taiwan, urging them to stop official interactions in all forms with the Taiwan region. The Foreign Ministry was making the statement in response to the visit of Governor of the U.S. state of Indiana, Eric Holcomb, this week to Taiwan. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson insists Taiwan is an inseparable part of China's territory and urges relevant parties to abide by the One China principle and provisions of the 3 China-U.S. joint communique. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, along with multiple countries' permanent representatives to the UN on Monday, called on countries around the world to reach consensus and make due contributions to common security. A UN Security Council briefing was held on Monday on promoting common security through dialogue and cooperation. That briefing was hosted by China and attended by the UN Secretary-General and representatives from multiple countries. While addressing the briefing, Guterres stressed the need to forge a global consensus around the cooperation required to ensure collective security. Well, first it was China, now it's South Korea conducting an anti-terror drill, simulating explosions and fire at shopping malls in Seoul earlier today. There they are. As part of the country's annual Uchi civil defense drills, the Uchi civil defense drills are from August 22nd to the 25th. They aim to check the country's crisis management and emergency preparedness amid North Korea's recent missile threats, the first nationwide government drill since the coronavirus pandemic, according to the Ministry of Interior and Safety. 70 personnel from military, police, fire station and local governments, as well as citizens, participated in the drill. People were seen escaping from shopping mall while firefighters scaled a building to rescue people inside, and soldiers defused the mock bomb. Now, separately, the US-South Korea joint military exercise Uchi Freedom Shield also began on Monday. It will continue until September 1st with the resumption of field training for the allies seeking to tighten readiness over North Korea's potential weapons tests. Still in Asia, United Nations top humanitarian official has called on the international community to help the people of Afghanistan towards a road of recovery. Martin Griffiths, UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, explained why it is crucial for the international community to join hands and stand by the Afghan people in solidarity while addressing a new program, Afghanistan in Transition, a co-production between two major media networks of China and Afghanistan.
"19 million people, which is nearly half the population, remain food insecure. That includes 6.6 million people at emergency levels of food insecurity, the largest number in one single country in the world today. We need a proactive and sustained response to reduce the risk of famine. And at the same time, we have less than half of the funding needed to help these people. First, economic shocks. These are now the primary driver of humanitarian need across Afghanistan. Second, people have been pushed over the edge by natural hazards and climate shocks over the years. Third, women and girls face an alarming rollback on their rights. The economy must be supported. The formal banking system must be restored and reconnected with the international financial system. Basic services, such as health and water, must be strengthened and preserved. And we need to restore women's and girls' human rights. Girls must have access to secondary education and beyond. Other restrictions on women's movement also affect their ability to access life-saving assistance.
Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the advice from the Solicitor General showed his predecessor Scott Morrison's secret appointment to ministries during the COVID-19 pandemic fundamentally undermined responsible government despite being legally valid. That advice from the country's second highest law officer was a very clear criticism of the implications for Australia's parliamentary democracy, according to Albanese, who was addressing a news conference in Canberra. Albanese said his cabinet had agreed that there will be a further inquiry into the matter to answer questions on how the unprecedented assumption of power occurred and the need for reform.
In summary, the Solicitor General has concluded that Mr Morrison was validly appointed by the Governor-General to administer the various departments to which he was appointed, but it particularly considered the issue of the department for which of resources, because quite clearly we know that a decision was made on the PEP 11 project. The advice, though, is, I think, a very clear criticism and critique of the implications that are there for our democratic system of government of what happened under the former Morrison government. Paragraph 44 and 46 go to the principle of responsible government being, to quote the Solicitor General, fundamentally undermined by the former government's actions. So we will make a future announcement about an inquiry. I'm giving notice today that inquiry will take place. This isn't something that can be just dismissed. This is something that goes to our very system of government, which the Solicitor General's advice makes very clear.
We're in the United States, says Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top U.S. infectious disease official who became the face of America's COVID-19 pandemic response under President Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and now says he is stepping down in December after more than 5 decades of public service. Fauci, whose efforts to fight the pandemic were applauded by many public health experts, even as he was vilified by Trump and many Republicans, will be leaving his post as chief medical advisor to Biden and director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, part of the National Institutes of Health. He's 81 years old. He's headed the institute since 1984. Fauci has served under 7 U.S. presidents, beginning with Republican Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, focusing on newly emerging and re-emerging infectious disease threats, including HIV/AIDS, Ebola, Zika, monkeypox, and COVID-19. He's endured criticism, of course, from Trump and various conservatives, and even death threats from people who objected to safeguards such as vaccination, social distancing, and masking that he advocated to try to limit the lethality of the COVID-19 pandemic. He'll step down as chief of the NIAID Laboratory of Immunoregulation. A former president of the United States, Donald Trump, has asked the federal court to temporarily block the FBI from reviewing the materials it seized 2 weeks ago from his Florida home until a special master can be appointed to oversee the review. Trump's motion filed in federal court in West Palm Beach, Florida, also demanded that the U.S. Justice Department provide him a more detailed property receipt outlining items the FBI seized from his Mar-a-Lago home during its August 8th search, and asked investigators to return any items outside the scope of the search warrant. A special master can sometimes be appointed in highly sensitive cases to go through seized materials and ensure that investigators do not review privileged information. When FBI agents had searched the homes of Trump's former lawyers, Michael Cohen and Rudy Giuliani, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan requested the appointment of a special master. Trump's request, however, was assigned to U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon, whom Trump appointed to the bench. A Justice Department spokesperson said prosecutors will file their response in court. Our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, joins us now. Maria, help us make sense of, President Donald Trump's request here. The only thing he'd pointed out before, of course, was his passports, which were returned. So what other personal items could be missing from his Mar-a-Lago home? And, why make a request like this? What was he hoping to achieve with the suit?
It's been clear January 6th hearing has been unsettling, obviously, to the former president, especially as some of his White House staff members have spoken out and given information that could be damaging to the former president, especially as he looks to secure a bid for the next presidential election cycle. And so this is going to ensure that there are no additional data points that could be brought forth, especially as he has noted that he doesn't believe that they should have done the raid back in early August. And so due to that, he is a little concerned. He does not know exactly what could be next. He is very clear that the January 6th hearings are going to continue. And I think he's a bit concerned that this could be leading to some further legal action against him.
Will this be distracting for the DOJ for its own investigation, which is why they searched Trump's Mar-a-Lago home?
The DOJ, I think, is expecting this. I think this actually is coming a little later than they even expected it would come. And so, and just because he's requesting a watchdog to oversee any further investigation, I think the DOJ is very prepared for that. And I think they believe that they are following against all guidelines that are federally acceptable when it comes to the raid. So I don't think this is going to at all deter them from further investigation.
Last week, they'd opposed the affidavit of laying out evidence for probable cause to search the former president's home. Has that changed? Because I know the former president wanted the affidavit to be made public, but if it was, then some parts of it would be redacted, some sensitive information would be redacted. Is the DOJ still considering, making it public?
Potentially, but I think, as you stated, this lawsuit that's been brought forth is kind of taking, forth, I think, the precedents at this time. And I think that the DOJ is just going to continue since he has put a lawsuit forward. They will just see how the judge decides to move forward and if they do have a watchdog and really focusing on that more so than the affidavit that has been requested to be released.
Let's talk about Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Anthony Fauci. Many of us got to know him, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. He became the face of the pandemic in the United States, guiding people on, the measures to take, modalities to curbing COVID. He's also supposed to be the guiding light for the CDC, which very recently admitted it was not much help during the pandemic. Has it been talked about how much this reflects on Dr. Fauci's reputation as he resigns?
No, I think that, as you said, they got to know him as the American doctor. And I think that, his work, I think, is going to supersede that. I think that many Americans, and as you said, across the world, people look to him for advice on that. And so I think his reputation is definitely already solidified. I think that despite some of the challenges in the U.S. having some of the greatest challenges across the world, I think does not take away from the work that he's done and does not take away from what has been stamped, I think, in American history for his work as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and he is leaving in December. We remember he was vilified by Donald Trump, who never accepted any of the measures advised by him or even the CDC. So what would Americans remember about him, and what do they still think about him now?
Americans are going to remember someone that they could look to. I think that when Americans are trying to figure out, when can I leave my home? What are the things I can do? When should I wear a mask? What is acceptable for, wearing a mask outside versus inside? When is it time for me to kind of put my mask back on? Obviously, we went through very highs and lows as it relates to the actual pandemic. So he was that voice of reason. I think they're going to remember him for kind of being that guide, that guiding post, even more so than their own actual physicians, their own family doctors. I think they first went to Dr. Fauci, and many other American doctors looked to him as well to help them guide their patients through this pandemic. So I think they're going to look at him as a guide, as a guiding post, and someone that kept a very calm demeanor throughout the process. You never saw him to seem too frightened about anything, even if he was providing with information that could be obviously one that you had to take very seriously. He was able to deliver that message in a way that many Americans could digest and then take the appropriate actions from there.
But did he bring Americans closer to vaccinations? It's been a tough one for many Americans, fighting against being vaccinated, even for the common flu that happens every year.
Unfortunately, the U.S. is very politically divided and has been prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. This really, if you look back at kind of was 16, 17, where you started to see the political division in the U.S. Now, whether that was occurring before, but it just wasn't as prevalent, probably so. But that is really where you see some of the division as it relates to the vaccination because of the political ideologies that exist in America and some of the challenges that we face in that. You can see where there are very clear political stances, whether it's anti-vaccination or obviously pro-vaccination. And so that has really put us in a very difficult spot when you talk about increasing the rate of vaccination. And obviously, we can see very clearly that Dr. Fauci has been in this past, 5 to 10 years. Obviously, President Biden and him have a probably better relationship than former President Trump. And so that would then directly speak to the political ideologies, and those who follow former President Trump might not have been as accepting of some of the advice of Dr. Fauci.
Maria, thanks again for speaking with us, and do stay safe, of course. Stay with us. More ahead on The World Today. Plus, when a seal comes visiting, one family's story about an unexpected visitor. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. We're in Africa now, where a Kenyan official who was in charge of elections in the constituency in the just concluded presidential elections or general elections collapsed and died on Monday. His name was Jeffrey Jitobu. He was at the electoral body's offices in Nanyuki town in central Kenya when he collapsed. He was pronounced dead after he was taken to hospital near the office. He was in charge of elections in Gichugu constituency in Kirinyaga County in central Kenya. His death comes after another officer in charge of a constituency in the capital, Nairobi, was tortured and murdered after disappearing from a tallying centre. The Electoral Commission's chairperson, Wafula Chebukati, had earlier said officers were being intimidated and threatened over the August 9 general election. In Lebanon, where the northern section of the grain silos damaged 2 years ago by a blast at the Beirut port collapsed earlier today, following warnings that the structure was leaning too far to stay up. According to local reports, the crash sent a cloud of brown-grey dust, you can see it there, billowing over the waterfront. There were no immediate reports of injuries. A huge explosion at the port on August 4, 2020, killed more than 220 people. It also gutted the northern section of the grain silos, leaving wheat and corn spilling out in the sun. And much recently, a fire had been smoldering in the silos for weeks. Officials said it was a result of summer heat igniting fermenting grain left rotting. Part of the structure collapsed on July 31st. Another section fell August 4, the second anniversary of the blast. On Sunday, the health ministry said the dust samples from around the port showed that the air contained high amounts of common mold, which would not be dangerous unless inhaled in large quantities over a long period of time. Checking in on the weather now. Heavy rains and strong winds have battered provinces in northern Philippines today, from severe tropical storm Ma-on. We're looking at this video taken by an eyewitness. It shows trees swaying in Cagayan province with winds of up to 111 miles per hour, forecasted by the Southeast Asian Nations Weather Agency. 2 villagers were injured after being hit by fallen trees, and over 500 people in the village and surrounding provinces were evacuated. President Fernando Marcos Jr. has declared a suspension of work in government offices and public schools in the capital, Manila, and of course in the outlying provinces until tomorrow at least. Well, look at what a lack of rainfall has caused in China. Local media reporting the satellite images of the drought affecting Poyang Lake in China's largest freshwater lake in Jiangxi province in April and in August. In April, Poyang Lake covered an area of nearly 4,000 square kilometers. I believe this is Texas we're watching. We're talking about China now, aren't we? Poyang Lake, located in one of the Yangtze River's floodplains and described as China's kidney because of the role it plays in regulating water supplies, is now 67% smaller than the average over the last 10 years. China remains on a heat red alert for a 12th day. Temperatures are expected to fall in parts of the central part of the country by tomorrow, and in Sichuan and Chongqing from August 29th, according to the weather agency. State forecasters say China's heat wave, which has lasted more than 2 months now, was about to hit a turning point with a cold front looming from the west and a typhoon approaching in the southeast. We can look at the weather now in Texas, which reported yesterday the flooding, flash floods, beg your pardon, in Texas. And now we have another viral video, an aerial footage, there it is, showing areas inundated by flood water after heavy rains flooded parts of North Texas. Media has reported 195 rescues due to high water incidents triggered by downpours between Sunday evening and Monday afternoon. Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins declared a state of disaster in Dallas County, triggering a request for state and federal assistance. He said in a tweet, residents need to report their damage to the Texas Division of Emergency Management. The National Weather Service issued a flood watch and warned of further showers and thunderstorms until at least Wednesday.
Our live shot is going to be really? Oh my God, it's a dog.
I got a hold of them and they come and rescued me. It took them about a half hour to figure out how to do it. It was the current's so strong going past my house, it'll wash you away.
Archaeologists in Peru have found several burial sites belonging to an ancient civilization dating from the 7th and 12th AD in Herme, Western Peru. That discovery, made by Polish archaeologists, is related to the Wari culture and reveals the existence of an elite of artisans dedicated to manufacturing pieces of great ornamental value. Burials belonging to 2 women, 2 men, 2 children, and a young man, among which the bundle of a personage dress with jewelry, ceramics, textiles, wools, tools, and handicrafts. A new finding is related to a previous one made in 2012 near the current tomb, where a mausoleum of 64 Wari women was found. Contrary to initial assumption, the discovery provides evidence that the Wari culture expanded from the countries south to the north, governed by the Wari culture from its capital, Ayacucho. We end on a very pretty interesting note, I should say. A curious young seal has returned to the sea, thankfully, after breaking into a New Zealand home. There he is, harassing the resident cat, hanging about in the hallway for a couple of hours while the children slept upstairs, and miraculously and thankfully ruining nothing. Ross' family were more than a little surprised to find the fur seal in their home, which is about 150 meters from the shore. Phil Ross, who happens to be a marine biologist, said it was unfortunate he was the only one not home at the time the seal visited. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.